Hello, greetings everyone. Welcome to Connect Africa. Welcome to our daily session where we analyze what's happening in the continent and globally that matters to us. So, for today, we have chosen a very current topic, which is the China Africa Summit. Right now, most of the African heads of states are in Beijing, which will start from the 4th of September up to 6th of September. For this, we have Kwame Gonza with us. I'm going to go ahead and drop the first question. So, why we have seen, I think it is the highest of, I read somewhere like that, the highest of in number having like the heads of states. So first of all, this China Africa Summit it happens every 3 years, and the place is like it changes between either in China or one of the African countries. So this time it is in China, in Beijing, and this President Xi Jinping, I think it's his second forum on China Africa Summit cooperation. That's what they call it. Having this, and himself have been in Africa around, I think, 5 times. So it's where actually the relation between China and Africa is very, it's more and more growing every aspect. I hear my echo. Yeah. So, having said that, Kwame, first of all, welcome. And can you give us a general overview of this forum in terms of, the relation between China, Africa? Is it growing in every aspect? Why is it different compared to the previous one? Just give us a general overview, and perhaps we go the detailed one later on. But I would like you to give us, if you can, like in terms of like mutual beneficial cooperations, strategic relations, like people to, is it growing in every aspect? Is there a shared value in this relation? Yeah, so back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mahlet, and greetings to you, of course. So the China Africa Summit, which is Focac, is called the Forum on China Africa Cooperation. Of course, was proposed by the Chinese government, and I think it started around 2018 or 2019. I'm forgetting, but the last one happened in 2021, and this was started by Beijing, of course, in order to achieve its objectives when it comes to this cooperation. Beijing or China is a huge manufacturing, is the factory of the world as we know it today, from iPhones to whatever you can talk about, even electric vehicles right now. So they have started also to manufacture their own aircraft, and which aircraft, of course, are expected that they may find their way, first of all, in Africa before they go to Europe. And of course, in Asia, they may find themselves in Asia and Africa before they are accepted in Europe. So China, having been or being a manufacturing behemoth or giant, it needs the resources. It imports a lot of oil, of course, from a lot of African countries, including the Middle East. It imports a lot from the Middle East. Actually, it's the leading importer of oil right now from Saudi Arabia, even though before it was the United States. So you can see that it needs a lot of resources, and therefore it needs Africa when it comes to feeding these, industrial machine, which it has built up over, since independence, since 1949, when it got its independence and was able to unify. It was unified under Mao, and then later on, Deng Xiaoping, of course, would come and do the reforms after the death of President Mao in the later part of the 1970s. Now, that relationship of course, can only be described as fair. Is not the best. Okay, is not the best. The best relationship, I think, is for Africa to lead and to define whatever it is. But we find that Africa has entered in these relationships, of course, from a weak point, a divided point, and you find that small countries with a GDP of 5 billion are going to China to try to negotiate with China of $18 billion, of course, which is ironic. So we normally enter this relationship as Africa on one side individually, and China comes with all its power. But of course, China has, by all means, depending on its interests, tried to make this relationship as fair as possible compared to the West. Now, if you will notice, I'm saying fair because I don't think that we are getting the best. All right, we are getting the best deal. The best deal can only be gotten if we unify as Africans and speak with one voice and be able to negotiate for these resources which we have, all of us, so that anyone who wants these resources would not jump from one side to the other. Because, for example, right now, if Ghana, let me say, refuses to negotiate a bad deal, accept a bad deal with the mining of gold, these corporations, whether it's Chinese, whether it's the Western, they will jump and go to South Africa, right? Because they know in South Africa there's gold. Or if South Africa refuses, they will jump and go to Mali or Niger or something like that. So then that means that you are defeating yourself. We are defeating ourselves. And these countries, you may find that they may sell themselves at the expense of the neighbor. So some of the African countries have been selling themselves at the expense of their neighbors. So the relationship now, what we are seeing even to today, is that we've been summoned, numerous times, even by Britain, European Union, the United States, and it continues to be like that. They continue to define the objective of what this relationship should be, or the relationship should look like. And so this relationship is a continuation of that. But of course, China has been fair, like I say, on numerous cases, and in its work with us, in its relationship with us, it has of course achieved some things which you can see. Okay, that these are some things which are visible, and of course we'll continue to talk about that. Now, it is coming at a time. This summit itself is coming at a time when we are facing tremendous changes across the globe, and of course, even these changes are evident to everyone who's out there and watching. Even President Xi Jinping himself, when he visited Moscow, mentioned about this, that there is tremendous changes happening across the world. And actually, we are the ones driving them. Was speaking to President Putin, China and Russia, they are the ones who are driving these changes. So those changes are happening. Now, these changes, of course, have happened, and they have led to pressure between the West and the East, China and then the United States and the whole Western world. So Africa is facing a lot of pressures at the same time that the West wants to, because the West is the let me say, the traditional exploiter of the African continent. So it feels that if China treats us better, better than it treats us, okay, if China treats Africans better than the West treats, the Africans, then the Africans may choose, China, all right, or may choose Russia. And of course, we have seen this, for the past 20 years, where the West had become paranoid, and it started, demonizing. We have seen the campaigns by Western diplomats all across the African continent, demonizing China, saying China is burdening Africa with huge debts, even though the figures show a different thing. The figures show that China just has about 13% of Africa's debt. So there's no debt. It's just that its debt has been more productive on the African continent compared to the West. So the summit is coming amidst these kind of challenges. And of course, there has been also a reduction in Chinese help to the African continent when it comes to Chinese money, which flows into the continent. But still, you can see that there is reasonable projects that have been carried out on the African continent with the Chinese, and of course with our friends in the West. We don't see any projects that they are carrying out on the continent, apart from making a lot of noise. So there is that feeling right now that is there, that we are having this pressure. The African heads of state may go there to have some of these discussions, of course, with their Chinese counterparts about the pressures they are currently facing from the United States. And some of them may want to balance this relationship with the West, of course, with this particular attendance of the summit. So the summit is just building on the previous summits that have happened, and to reflect on what China had promised in the past. Some of the things have been fulfilled, some of them have not been fulfilled. Like in 2021, they promised to help Africa build up its health sector, and they built for us the Africa CDC, Africa Center for Disease Control, which is based in Ethiopia, where of course the African Union is currently, and which African Union also was built by the Chinese. So there is certain things which they have achieved on one hand, and there is certain things which they have not, fulfilled. And of course, someone may say because of the slowing down of their economy also. So we are entering this summit, which is starting tomorrow. It's supposed to be from the 3rd, I think, to the 5th. From the 3rd to the, is this 3rd to the 5th? Yeah. So from the 3rd to the 5th.
It's from the 4th to the 6th.
Yes, yeah, from the 4th to the 5th. So from the 4th to the 5th. So we are entering it, in a period when there's a lot of changes in the world. There's a lot of paranoia in the West, and demonizing, of course, this relationship, and patronizing, overbearing by the West on the African continent to try to show that they are the ones who control the African continent, and therefore the African people belong to them, or they are some sort of their property, or slaves or something. So there's a lot of pressures as we speak.
Interesting. Just to remind our viewers, this forum that's going on now in China is under the theme of for this year, joining hands to advance modernization and build a high-level China-Africa community with a shared future. That's the theme of or the slogan of the this forum. Now, before I move to the next question, I would like to say thank you to OMB. He or she is from UK. Thank you for your donation. Really, as he or she said, it's a student. So thank you. We really appreciate, regardless of the amount. Thank you so much. Moving to the next question. I really hear. I hear my echo. The presidents now, some things that I don't understand is if it's starting on the 4th, today is on the 2nd, and these leaders or heads of state started to arrive from yesterday, and what are they doing? I mean, yes, I read that the president is have a welcoming and opening ceremony, meaning where they all have dinner. But yeah, why so early? And they're heads of states. You know how these politicians are hesitant to leave their little sovereign countries, don't trust it. So why is there a program that perhaps I am not aware of that. It didn't come across to my reading. Uh,
No,
and
I
having
think
with that also, you can answer us who is there, who is attending, and on what. And usually we know, for example, when it's a US Africa summit, what the US is looking for in that country. Probably we can even predict what kind of results will come out from the side, on the side bilateral meeting. So yeah, if you can analyze it for us, who is attending and how, why. Yeah.
yeah. So when it comes to the attendance, you mentioned that some of the heads of states went ahead before the summit itself. I think this is typical of presidents. Sometimes they go and they want to have a one-on-one meeting or some sort of official visit. They put it, they call it an official visit sometimes. If you remember the BRICS summit which happened in South Africa, President Xi Jinping went earlier to South Africa so that he had a state visit, at the same time, and then he was attending the BRICS summit itself. So even this time, actually, President Cyril Ramaphosa also went early and he had some sort of state visit in China, and they met with President Xi Jinping, and President Assimi Goita also of Mali went early. So they normally have these state visits and one-on-one with President Xi Jinping to have discussion, or any other heads of state. This is normally done by the heads of states and different countries whenever there is these big summits. Sometimes it happens like that. So it could be that they want to combine an official visit together with an official state visit together with attendance of these particular summits. And of course, in one way or the other, also it helps to save the country's resources instead of going and coming back. So you could achieve that at once. Now, and of course, they may want to have other discussions, maybe to tour and see the country with their delegations and something like that, to see how much progress it has made and the lessons that can be learned. That is also possible, in one way or the other. Yes, so the summit is a big one. China holds a very big position on the African continent. Its position is no small position on the African continent due to it being a significant lender of the African continent, and it is the biggest trader with the African continent compared to the West and Europe combined. Actually, I gave out some figures some time back that if you look at the way China has been trading with Africa for the last 40 years, 30 or 40 years, and our trade was almost clocking $300 billion. If the West, for the last 600 years, was trading in the same way China was doing with Africa, our trade with the West should be around $9 trillion, should be close to $9.7 trillion, altogether. But it is below even China, which has been engaged directly with Africa for less than 40 years. So it shows you that one side has been stealing from the African continent, when it comes to the relationship between African and the West, the whole West combined, actually. So then what we see is that, of course, China is a very important figure is a very important country and partner on the African continent, being the biggest trading partner of the African continent, and most of the goods actually on the African continent are imported from China. So this means that majority of the African heads of state are going to attend. And China has built a lot of infrastructure. For the last 20 years, the growth that has been happening on the African continent has been happening because of China, not because of the West. It is because of the engagement of Africa with China. And that engagement has brought a lot of infrastructure, including roads and all the other basic infrastructure, whether you're talking about telecommunications, even the digital age, for it to come and take over in Africa, whereby telephones were all over. It was because of China, actually. Many people don't remember this. Is when China got its hands on the technology it democratized. This is something which many people don't remember, that whenever China gets its hands on technology, it sort of democratizes it so that everyone can have. So the first phones which many of us were used, they were Chinese phones. Even today, majority of the people on the African continent, whether it's smartphones, whether it's what phone, they're using Chinese phones. So China was instrumental even in that area of digitizing the African continent. And of course, it's even continuing. We see that Huawei is a big partner to many of the telecommunications companies on the African continent. Most of them, like MTN, they use Huawei gear, when it comes to 4G and 5G base stations and all the other equipment. So consider it has played a major role on the African continent, whether you like it or not, whether you appreciate it or not. It is a huge, huge partner. Now, this means that the African heads of state, of course, are going to respect it, are going to respect China. And whenever it calls that we should have a dialogue, they are going to respond. And so we see people like President Cyril Ramaphosa, when he's there. And as you know, South Africa is the most advanced economy on the African continent. Then we have Nigeria went. Of course, Nigeria is having currently a lot of problems. And the problems, of course, which it has, the president has pushed the country into with the guidance of the International Monetary Fund. Maybe he may seek some relief because China has built some, electric trains in Nigeria with standard gauge. I think it's the Lagos light rail system. I think that is how they call it. Blue rail, they call it blue rail, Lagos light blue rail system or something like that. So China is invested in there. So President Tinubu is there, and we know that Nigeria, before the devaluation of the currency, has been the biggest economy on the African continent. President, Prime Minister Abiy, I'm sure is going to be there, of Ethiopia. That one I'm just certain, but he might be there because Ethiopia too has a huge relationship with China, huge relationship with the building of the Djibouti.
In fact, to add on that one, Ethiopia has been given this, can I call it brand or whatever? It's something that by China, an all-time weather, an all-time round weather.
Yes. So it has China has grades of relationship with the various African countries. So it has this an all-weather sort of strategic relationship with Ethiopia, which is very, very important. And the fact that also Ethiopia is the headquarters to the African Union headquarters, it is unlikely that the Prime Minister Abiy would not attend, because when he attends, it carries a lot of weight. And so you have these industrial parks, which were all also the result of the cooperation of Ethiopia with China. So the cooperation is deep, the relationship is deep, that it is unlikely that the Prime Minister would not attend. I think that he's going to attend. So you can see that the major economies on the African continent are going to attend. Other presidents, Nana Addo has gone to attend also. Recently, Nana Addo inaugurated an oil refinery, in Ghana, the second oil refinery in Ghana, which was built by Chinese Central Oil Refinery, $3 billion. So you can see that he's going to attend. Of course, we've spoken about Mali. Assimi Goita is also going to attend. The Ugandan president, I don't know whether it's because he has become old. I expected that he would also attend, because China has really done a lot of things in Uganda, a lot of roads. The biggest dam over there in Uganda, which is called Karuma Hydropower Dam, which is more than 600 megawatts, was built by China, with the help of China, of course, and the United States and the Ugandan government also contributed. Kenya, President Ruto is there. Of course, this is the usual suspect, who said when he came to power that African heads of state should stop moving around the continent, around the world, going to these summits. We should just send a few people. He is there, and we know what China, of course, has done in Kenya, with the Mombasa Nairobi, standard gauge railway, which is one of the most modern railway system, in the East African region, and of course, in addition to the Djibouti Ethiopia railway. So huge infrastructure.
Suluhu is there? Tanzania. Suluhu.
Yeah. So Suluhu also is likely to be there, because I remember last year she was invited to China And China also is taking up some. There's a port which it is taking up in Tanzania. It's going to develop a port. I don't have the name clearly, but I saw some article where China is trying to develop a port in Tanzania. So President Suluhu is likely to be there also. So you can see that most of those presidents are going to be there. Susu Nguesso is going to be there. From Congo is actually going to be a co-chair with President Xi Jinping of this particular summit. So most of the heads of states are going to be present. So we could expect that maybe from somewhere 25 to 30 heads of state are going to be present to this particular summit. And of course, that is a good number.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think I read it's in terms of heads of states and diplomats that it's bringing, it's the highest from so far of the forum on China-Africa cooperation. Now, I want to add, before I move to the next question, I really want to ask you what's your view that, when this heads of states comes, not everyone is getting along. For example, take Ethiopia. We have the tension with Egypt, which LCC is attending, and Somalia. I saw Somalia's President Sheikh Hassan is there. And there's also Eritrea president. That's very important because you don't see President Isaias Afwerki traveling. So he did attend the Russia Africa Summit. Now he's attending the.
Yeah, I saw him attending the Eritrean president.
And
I saw
not
him.
really that it's not like before the relation. So these kind of things I'm just going to throw this question. Do leaders care when you have another one in the room in which you are not getting along, or there's some tension? It doesn't matter, or based on this heads of states council, or perhaps delegate to someone else?
So they don't care, and that should worry us, of course. That should worry us, the fact that the heads of states can go over there and sit in one room, under the influence of an external power. The fact that they can go and sit in one room and listen to an external power, giving them, lectures, let me say lectures, all right, or proposing its position and its interests, on the African continent. The fact that they have left here, they have not spoken about, they have not ironed out their differences. It should give us sleepless nights as Africans, because then that means that if they go over there and sit in that room and they listen to President Xi Jinping, whatever he is saying about the African continent, that is going to do about the African continent, it's not, when they come back, it's not going to be, implemented or achieved, because they are not going to ask for accountability. They don't have the humility to sit down together and dialogue and say, these people, they promised us this. China promised us this. Let us go and demand it together. So when they come back home, then these differences which they have will continue to be magnified. So that should worry us as Africans. And it's a big problem. It's a huge problem that we have to find medicine for. And so that means that the solving of conflicts within the African continent, or the differences, has to be intensified when we are at home, when we are on the continent here. Whether it's the conflict between, the differences between Ethiopia and Egypt, or Ethiopia and Somalia, we have to find a way, because at the end of the day, we are the ones who are going to lose, because these people, whether it's Europeans, this is what they like. They're going to exploit that. Once you have these differences, they're going to continue to exploit that. And who's going to lose? It's the African people. The Egyptians are not going to gain from this. And the Ethiopians are not going to gain from this. They're going to lose. And who's going to benefit? Is the West, or is the Chinese who are going to benefit, or is the Turkish, or the Europeans? Because once they see that you are not serious, you have not even come. So these conflicts, these differences, actually in themselves, the quarrels, they make you come without a unified agenda. So that means you're not going to benefit much for the people. So you have come with huge differences in this room, You don't have something which is unifying you, but rather you have something which is dividing you and keeping you apart. And this is a huge problem that we have to really be worried of, because it's going to affect, at the end of the day, it's going to affect the people, the African people on the ground.
Uh, True. Uh, for example, yeah, somebody said here, is it child of God? Who was it? No, lion rules the jungle. For example, Assimi Goita, Colonel Assimi Goita, is now representing the AES, as we don't see Burkina Faso and Niger. Burkina Faso, I think Ibrahim Traore was supposed to go, but I read that there is a security issue because there is the terrorists again have attacked. Maybe that has made him, to change it. But anyway, Assimi Goita will represent AES, which is really good. This is what we want. If these heads of states of the 54 countries have been represented by few of them. Another one, maybe it's because it might be related. OMG, it's all said. When I went to China, I got jealous of the country's infrastructure, but I also got inspired by the fact that people can build and lift themselves from poverty. I hope our leaders are uh, inspired. There was somebody who asked a very important question. Yeah, Yoruba land. What happens when these organized nations like US, China, etc., no longer need one of our minerals as a primary input to their industries? It's a question. What do we do then economically? Now, whether you can choose to reflect it later on or now, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you, what do we expect from this Beijing Focac Forum on China-Africa cooperation and compared to the previous one? Yeah, and if you can highlight some of important or significant projects that China is building in the continent.
Thank you, Mahlet. Just to answer the person who asked, what happens then when the West doesn't need our minerals anymore? Of course, we don't have even to wait for that moment. That moment in itself, of course, may never arrive. But what you should know is that at the needing of our minerals, the continued, reliance and needing of our minerals is going to continue to bring suffering on the African continent. And so we should not even wait for them not to stop needing. They stop needing our minerals, you just know that they will have taken over the whole continent. Maybe we will have become extinct, as the people will have become extinct, like what you see happened with the Native Americans. So the time the Europeans stopped needing the Native Americans, they had gone extinct and they have wiped them off the island. So that day is not going to arrive, but then we should not wait for it. As a people, this generation should not wait for that day to arrive. The African heads of state, of course, continue to move in the opposite direction of where they're supposed to go, and we have to check them. If we don't check them, the whole race, of course, will go extinct, and that is a scary, of course, proposition, but it is true because it has happened to other races across the world, like the Native Americans and the Australians, the Native Australians, the Native New Zealand people, all these people, they were, you know, you know, genocide was carried out on them and they went extinct. They are no more there. So it's a scary, thought. It's something scary to think about. So the projects, I think the expectation is that what we are seeing is that the International Monetary Fund, of course, has been coming on strongly on the African continent since 2020. It has been coming back after the COVID period, and the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, they are forcing themselves on the African continent hugely. They are just forcing themselves to give loans. They are forcing African countries to take loans by force. And of course, this is simply because they are gaining a lot from them. And we have done some videos on this. They are gaining through interest rates. And for those who want to understand, they should go and read Nkrumah's book, Neo-Colonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. He, expounds on this. He, shows us why the International Monetary Fund and World Bank are very dangerous, because they are building wealth. The West is building wealth even apart from taking our resources. They build the wealth also through these loans which they give to Africa. And at the end of the day, it's the poor people on the African continent who pay back these huge interest rates for the Western people to live like they are in heaven and for us to live like we are in hell. So we see that the IMF has been pushing itself on the African continent. And of course, some heads of state may, even though they may feel helpless and others may feel, may be selfish, may want, I think, to discuss with China on how to, at least to increase, its, funding on the African continent and funding of various projects on the African continent themselves. And of course, it is unfortunate that they're not talking about continental projects themselves. And when it comes to continental projects, it is actually China who proposes. For example, the building of the African Union headquarters. For example, the building of Africa Center for Disease Control. It is China who proposed all these projects. So they may want that. And people like in East Africa, for example, Kenya, they want to discuss the extension of the railway line from the standard gauge railway line from Nairobi to all the way to Uganda, both of them, Uganda and Kenya. So they may want to seek finance to help to do that. In Ghana, we saw that the Chinese are getting involved. Of course, two companies are getting involved in the building of the 300,000 barrels per day of oil refinery, another oil refinery they are planning to build in Ghana, which President Akufo-Addo launched a few weeks ago. And of course, we reported that one also here on Connect Africa, that Ghana is trying to build a 300,000 oil refinery. And of course, Assimi Goita and Mali, maybe he may want to negotiate with them on behalf, to talk about Niger's challenges, which it has been having with the Benin when it comes to the oil pipeline, whereby the oil has been blocked by Benin. So I think there may be some sit down between those two, Niger, on one side, together with the AES and Benin, which has been blocking the oil pipeline, because that oil pipeline, of course, was built by the Chinese, and that is what it is. On the other side, South Africa, of course, is a member in BRICS, may want to strengthen the relationship with China. But China also gave some power equipment, because South Africa has been experiencing power problems in the country. So China gave some power equipment to South Africa to help it to deal with the power problems which have been affecting the country, and of course productivity. So you see that South Africa wants to extend that hand of appreciation, even by being present itself. It shows that they appreciate and they respect China, because China is almost the leader of the BRICS family. And of course, the same thing with Ethiopia. Ethiopia may want to attend and be present, to appreciate the fact that it has just been inducted into the BRICS family. So what we are seeing is that the heads of state may want to request China to invest more in the African continent. And of course, there has been the talk of processing raw materials, whether they have a plan and or they are going to invite it to build the factories within their various African countries. So that is going to be the issue. The major issue, of course, also is going to be the refining or the processing of raw materials. I think is going to be center stage when they go over there. So I think that these are some of the key issues that will be discussed during this summit. And on the side of China, of course, we see that due to the problems that it is facing with the West, they are putting sanctions on China's electric vehicles. We saw that China has already started putting up assembly plants, starting with Algeria. They're going to put up assembly plants for electric vehicles there. So they may want to take advantage of the African market for electric vehicles. In Kenya also, they are trying to put up some assembly plants over there. In Kenya, South Africa already they have assembly plants for even in internal combustion engines. They already have them. So they may seek to increase that. And on the other side, also you can talk about solar panels. You know, they may want to convince African countries to invest in renewable energy, and China may want to finance some of the renewable energy projects for solar panels. And that is simply because it's facing problems with the West. And China has been, of course, moving to, you know, expanding its cooperation with the global South, majorly even the South Asian countries, you know, the countries in Asia, of course, apart from India, where they have some small differences, you know, due to the conflict which they have over their border. But it will continue. China will also continue to move into the African continent to show the Africans that the image which the West is painting of China is not, you know, the real image. But I think also the Africans themselves image. I think the Africans ourselves also know, the African heads of state know that the image which the West is trying to paint about China, when we look at the facts, we put out papers and look at the facts, they are painting lies, you know, they are false. It's a false image that they are painting of China. So I think that these are the issues that they are going to be discussed to strengthen the relationship between each other, between the Chinese and the Africans. But China, of course, would want, because it needs to continue to grow. As an economy, China needs to continue to grow if it wants to surpass the United States. Then if it needs to grow, then it needs the markets. And countries like Zimbabwe, who is present, also Botswana is going to be present. They have lithium, but, you know, but Zimbabwe has a lot of lithium. The Chinese may want, you know, to strengthen that relationship with Zimbabwe. And it has been a long one, because it was not China. I think the Zimbabwe government also would have collapsed, but China has been helping a lot, you know, to support it during this period when the West has imposed a lot of sanctions on Zimbabwe. So it sort of gave Zimbabwe a lifeline, you know, here and there, you know, once in a while. So I think that they may want to strengthen that relationship. And also, I think the Zambian president is likely to attend also, because China has wanted to invest again in a railway platform which they built way back in the 60s by, you know, under President Mao, the Tazam Railway, which is the Tanzania-Zambia railway line, which goes all the way from Zambia to Tanzania. And that railway line, of course, you know, that railway line, of course, they want to upgrade it, and China has wanted to invest about $1 billion in that railway platform so that they can improve it and upgrade it, because it is an old railway platform. And of course, the result is going to be the taking out of resources, and especially copper from Zambia, you know, and all this region. And they could put together the lithium, of course, from Zimbabwe and take it through that railway line. And of course, that one is unfortunate, but that's what it is, of course. And we see Senegal also, of course, Senegal may want investments into the oil, you know, the industry. They want investments into their oil and gas industry. They're just entering the phase of production. So I think the Omai Faye, who was present, may want also present in you know, at this particular summit, may want to seek some investments by China, because China is not very much present. I didn't see it when I looked at the companies which have invested, you know, in the oil and gas sector in.
But
In
Diomaye is in China right
yes,
now?
he's gonna attend. Yes, he's gonna attend to.
Okay.
So basically, this is what I believe that are going to be the expectations of the African heads of state, and of course to look at they will look at also the previous promises which China made that have not been met, you know, during the various summits, even though it has fulfilled some of them have not been met. Maybe they may want to remind it, including trade. I hear that they had promised Africa to increase Africa imports from Africa up to $300 billion. So now the Africans may want to question this particular issue, whether it has been what has been the problem, why this has not been fulfilled, that the imports from Africa of agricultural goods and some of the finished products from the continent, have not been fulfilled. So if a few unfulfilled promises here and there, I think they may want to discuss about that. So what I don't know is whether the chairperson of the African Union Commission is going to attend, but normally he attends these particular summits.
Yeah, and he's gonna lead it. That's what they say. Like, although most of the heads of states are there, but like he kind of going to lead it with President Xi Jinping. That's what, at least, what I read. Now, in terms of geopolitics effect, let's talk about that. Like, for example, comparing it with the U.S. Africa summit. Yeah, and the results.
Yeah, so for the results, ever since the we know there was the last summit between China and Africa was in 2021, and we can see, for example, the Africa Center for Disease Control is there. But ever since the US had its summit with Africa in 2022, we have not seen anything from the $55 billion which was promised by the US. Yeah. And of course, they say they are quick to say that there was these partnerships, I don't know, American Express, and all these dubious, partnerships, which you don't see how Africa is benefiting. It is very difficult to see where we are benefiting from the relationship between the African continent and the United States. It's very difficult. Even the radar project, which is being touted as a huge investment by the United States, which is the Lobito corridor from Angola to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they want to extend that to Zambia. We are not even very sure they will extend it to Zambia. It's just hype. They are just hyping it, and it's just propaganda that they are pumping out and publishing it even in the media. So we don't see anything practical. And the railway platform itself, which they are trying to rehabilitate, okay, they are not trying to build a new railway platform. They are trying to rehabilitate a railway which has been existent, all right? And they have used it even to export some of the copper, from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Baltimore. The first consignment went. So you can see that the railway is not for benefiting the Africans, but rather it's for benefiting the United States. Even though the United States is on top of the roof of the world, claiming that they are investing in Africa, we don't see any serious investment on the African continent by the United States. During the U.S.-Africa summit, there was there was a highway which was promised that they're going to build a highway to connect all the way, around in Niger, right? From, I think it was supposed to be from Algeria and all the way through Niger. And they were saying they were going to invest about $500 million. But that we have not seen anything, all right? So when you compare the two, you don't, they cannot even be compared. It's not, there's no even comparing, because China is way, way ahead when it comes to its contribution to the African continent. You can move across the continent and look at projects. This is what has been built, a port, an airport is being finished in Benin. I think it's Benin or Togo. There's a new, I think it's in Togo, right? It's in Togo. A new airport is being finished in Togo. We are looking at the railway platform, which we already talked about, Mombasa, standard gauge rail, Mombasa to Nairobi. We have a railway platform, standard gauge rail from Djibouti to Ethiopia. We have a dam. We have all these projects. We have a refinery, which has been built, $3 billion refinery in Ghana. In Nigeria, we have a railway. You can't see anywhere where the United States has built any of these projects, even a single dam, you see. So when you go back to the 60s, maybe you can say, oh, the Apostle Dam, which was built in Ghana, was built by, the United States Kaiser. And, so what else then can you talk about that the United States has built since the 60s on the African continent? So what we are seeing is the United States positioning itself with the propaganda and saying that they are investing in PEPFAR, that they invest in HIV alleviation on the African continent, and they claim that they invest about $11 billion every year. But when you ask where are you investing it, we don't see it, right? We don't see this is where the hospital, $1 billion hospital has been built, or $500 million hospital has been built. Where is it? So where is it? So is when you go across the continent, you see them attachments. Maybe they built a clinic in a hospital which was already built by an African government, and they claim that that is a PEPFAR initiative. All right, and then they will attach a huge figure on that particular clinic, which doesn't even cost, maybe $2 million or $3 million. They will attach a big figure of about $500 million and say this is where it went. So it's just ridiculous. It's just propaganda that we are seeing. And actually, even a few yesterday, I saw an article which appeared in Reuters, and what they are succeeding in, what the United States is succeeding in majorly, is propaganda across the African continent now. That is what they are succeeding in. They have a covert YouTube platform, which is called China Global South Project. It is over there on YouTube, in which they are, there's these guys, they are from Europe. They are claiming as if they are discussing Africa's relation, China and its relationship with Africa. They spend a lot of time on China and Africa and discussing, and they call themselves experts on China-Africa relationship. All right, but these guys are from the West. Of course, they have invited recently. A few weeks ago, they invited the undersecretary, U.S. Undersecretary of State. I think she's called Jendaya or Jendaya something. They invited her to speak there. So it's a propaganda platform. Now, Reuters, they did a podcast recently, about 2 weeks ago. No, 1 week ago, and they published it. I listened to it. The Reuters went and picked what they discussed in that podcast. And of course, they say they are based in South Africa. So Reuters went and picked that and published it as an expert opinion about what we should expect from South Africa. I mean, what we should expect from the China-Africa Summit. All right. And then another neo-colonial platform in East Africa, called the Nation Media, is actually operating in Uganda. It is a nation media, but it's neo-colonial outlet. It's called Monitor Publications in Uganda. Picked what Reuters published and pasted it and also published it. So you can see that what they are doing is just propaganda instead of investing in working and building the relationship with the African continent. And that's where, of course, I fear for them. Instead of putting in work like what the Chinese are doing and building a serious relationship with Africa, they instead want to come and dehumanize the African continent, dehumanize us, and then be overbearing, tell us what to do, tell the Africans what to do, instead of spending their energy on building a serious relationship with the African continent. So to compare between the two, I think would be even an overstatement to say that you can compare the two. You cannot compare between the United States and China, what they are doing on the African continent. From the point of industrialization, from point of infrastructure, even financing, all the money which is financed for African projects, you don't see the projects. Where are they? Where's the projects that the West has built on the African continent? You don't see anything. Instead, militarizing and intimidating, propaganda and demonizing. This is what you see, abusing, insulting Africans. So it's difficult. I think it's even if you want to favor the West, it's difficult to favor them.
Let me see. I thought there's a related question. Seeing this commented, United States spends their money on NGOs, okay, regime change and social engineering. I thought there's something. Hello, Greta Woodson. Welcome. Greta is a great sister, a great supporter. Thank you so much for all what you have been doing. Money spent on things like military bases is part of it. Yeah, actually, they just give us figure. If we really question, I don't know, not even 10% comes to the country. to Africa. And then when they hire their own people. Anyway, with all this, Kwame, so what do you think is a way forward? I mean, first of all, yes, it has been said repeatedly that the African Union will start to, to represent all these heads of states. And whenever there is this kind of summit by a non-African country, those representatives can go and attend. But still, we are doing it, even after Ruto has promised us and told us that this is going to be very, very soon practical. Well, it didn't happen. So by doing this, are they doing the right thing? And what is the way forward? Should they continue, the heads of states, attending such meeting whenever these non-African states call them, summon them, to attend? For whose benefit? Is it something we get out of it? Yeah. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, so the relationship, of course, with China, we benefit better, but it's not what we should be doing. I mean, we should be getting the best, and getting the best, that means industrialization of the African continent, rapid industrialization, not just industrialization. In this age where we are, you have to understand that when it comes to industrialization, you have to do it at scale in order for you to win. Okay, for you to win and be able to compete, have the ability of competing with the rest of the world, you have to do industrialization at scale. And that is if you're talking about building a civilization. Our forefathers and foremothers, when they spoke about unifying the African continent and rebuilding, they were talking about rebuilding a civilization. They were not talking about building, a dependent, city state like Singapore. All right, this is just a city state, or maybe Korea. All these are city states. These are not civilizations. When you're talking about civilizations, you are talking about like a European maybe civilization. You are talking about the Chinese civilization. You are talking about the Indian civilization. All right. So when our forefathers thought about rebuilding Africa, spoke about rebuilding Africa, they thought about building it together. Now, in this era where we are living, industrialization means that you are supposed to come out, you are supposed to come all out, right? You are supposed to go all in with everything you have, with all the resources, with all the might you have. Now, just to give you an idea, Uganda launched its first electric vehicle in 2011. All right, just a few years after Tesla launched its own in 2008. That's a period. That's a difference of about 3 years. But now, automobile companies, up to now, Uganda has not commercialized its electric vehicles. The first electric vehicle in Uganda and in Africa was launched in, the first electric vehicle in Africa was launched in Uganda, and it was done by the Makerere University students. All right. Now, come to 2018, there's companies in China which came in and launched in 2018 in China, electric vehicle companies, and they are now listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So where is Uganda's electric vehicles? So this is what I mean by manufacturing to scale. China is manufacturing, and in this era, you have to use all the power of the African continent if you're talking about manufacturing. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because if we want to compete, which we must, if we want to compete, which we must as Africans, we have to use all the power of the African continent, all the leverage, and that is the market. Because if you want to succeed anywhere, you have to first succeed at home. Now, Uganda could not even succeed at home. It doesn't have the resources to build an electric vehicle company, and yet they launched before many American companies they ever launched an electric vehicle in the United States. This Ford, General Motors, before they launched an electric vehicle, Uganda had launched its own, but it has not been able to commercialize because it's a small country. It doesn't have the capacity, even though this company is being sponsored by the state. They don't have. Uganda is just a country of $50 billion. All or $55 billion economy. Now, can you compete with Tesla, a company, just one company, a corporation, which has a net worth of more than $600 billion? Can you do that? You can't. So you have now to come to Africa, integrate the African continent, and build this market together. So what this means is that this is not even where you start from. You are supposed to start from the point of building integrated infrastructure on the African continent to open up the market. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area is a good step, but it is not enough. We are building a house from the rooftop with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We don't have a foundation, no walls to support the roof, and we are saying that we are building a house. So that is what they have done with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Now, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area needs something to open for it. You need to open the market. To open the market, you need a continental railway platform. This is what the African heads of state should be discussing when they go to China. That help us, we have come with a project. This is what we are working on. Help us to build this. Help us to lay a fiber optic cable across the African continent. This is what we should be talking about, so that we can cut the cost of communication across the African continent, because the African continent has the most expensive telecommunication, prices. We are the most expensive when it comes to telecommunications across the world. For someone to call from Nigeria to Ethiopia, extremely expensive, because the call has to go through Europe. So, which is ridiculous. So we need to open up the continent first before we can talk about, we can talk about trading. And these are the projects that we should be asking partners that we have raised. We should come with our money and say, we have raised our money, $100 billion. China, can you come and help us so that we can see how we can build this infrastructure together? Help us to lay a fiber optic cable across the African continent, so that we can commercialize or reduce the cost of communication on our continent. Help us. China's gone to space. Help us to send a satellite to space so that we can supply our own internet instead of depending on the West. Because our cables now, you remember, this very year, internet was, interrupted all across the East African coast and even in the West African coast. Why? The cables, they don't belong to the Africans. The cables, the fiber optic cables, they belong to the West. So anytime they want, they can cut us off. So these are the things which they should be discussing, going in these particular summits. Help us to send something to space. Help us to mechanize. Let us build a tractor plant on the African continent so that we can manufacture tractors. We want to mechanize our agriculture. We want to build maybe solar pumps on the African continent. Help us. Come as a continent and speak like this. This is the language that needs to be spoken. But of course, unfortunately, the African heads of state are not going to do that. They are not doing this, and they're not going to do that. That means that the responsibility now lies on us, the next generation, to find a way of achieving these objectives, these continental objectives, and integrating them in the interest of the continent and the future. Because it looks like the people who are there, they don't see the need for doing this. So then the responsibility is on the next generation of African leaders, and the young ones of this generation have to take that responsibility right now. And definitely we have to come together so that we can achieve this, and we can do it. We can do it. Our ancestors passed through a lot of things, and they achieved whatever they achieved for us. So for us, there's no need to despair and say we cannot achieve it. We can, we can stand through all these challenges, build manufacturing facilities here, and open up the continent. That is the only way the Africa Continental Free Trade Area would make meaning and industrialize the continent, manufacture steel and all these, manufacture the electric batteries. So it is the only way. And I think that we have to do it. We have to do it.
Thank you very much, Kwame, for that. So let's go to the chat section. What do we have? Greetings. Hello, Patricia. Welcome. Patricia is our supporter. Thank you, Patricia, Sister Patricia, in fact. Carlos Mbazira said it's, excuse me, it's a marathon. Sorry. It's a marathon, and Africa is competing with runners who have already looped the circuit 3 times, whilst we have barely looped one circuit. We cannot compete based on the current rules.
No, we can. So we can compete. Let me tell you, China was way behind when it arrived on the scene and is competing against the West. So, but how did China catch up? And now is they see it as a major challenge, a threat. They say that China is the greatest threat, which they have right now, the whole West. So we can compete. And the reason we can compete is that we see the mistakes that have been done by the West. We see the mistakes that have been done by China. Okay. And what don't we have? We have everything. Today we are consuming the same knowledge. The Western person, you can stand there. A lot of our people, especially who are in the diaspora, they sit in the same classes and they beat these white people all the time in classes. So there's nothing, we are consuming the same information. And that's the beauty of this. This is the beauty of it. You can stand and challenge them and say, this is rubbish that we are bringing over here. We will not accept it. And so if we are consuming the same knowledge, this even should give us much more confidence, to do what we have to do in rebuilding the African continent. So there's no such thing that they are ahead of us. This position in which we are, actually, it makes it even much more favorable for us to be ahead, to build and be ahead of them. Because we have a whole history of mistakes that have been done and the right things that have been done. That means we can correct it quickly and build something with less, mistakes compared to what they have done in all of history, slavery and all this, because we are not going to enslave anyone for us to build our civilization. So that's number one mistake, which they did. We are not going to do that. We are not going to colonize anyone and go and exploit anyone's resources. So these are the mistakes that we can correct on behalf of ourselves, but also on behalf of humanity. Because if you are going to start enslaving Europeans and bring them to work for you in Africa, it's going to be difficult for them. All right. So we correct all the mistakes which they did. And we have to, because if we don't correct them, then we are going to give them a chance to come and oppress us again and again, continuously, almost perpetually.
Okay, so Yorul Balan said during 60s, 70s, and 80s, the popular image of Chinese and Japanese who visited and studied in the West was of bespectacled groups with cameras. We now know this was huge information gathering exercise. Okay.
So Mahlet, what in 1986, one of the hedge funds, the guy who has the biggest hedge fund in the United States is called Red Dalio. His hedge fund is more than 160 billion dollars, and he himself is worth around 21 billion dollars, right? He said that he went to China in 1986 and went to the calculators, right, to China. And the Chinese thought that this was a magical machine, just a simple calculator, right? Because they had never seen it. So they thought that this was wonderful, was a wonderful machine, a powerful machine, a simple calculator. But now, can you imagine now that China is out competing them and is producing some of the latest technologies that the United States now cannot compete with China's technologies. Instead, it decided to ban them so that the United States citizens cannot have access to these technologies. So they will increase the tariffs on the technologies, in the vehicles. So now China has much more technology. Yet, 1986, they were even amused by a simple calculator. Now, can you say that if I bring a calculator to you as an African, you will be amused today? You will not be amused.
Yeah.
So you have a bigger chance actually even than China to progress and succeed. So what we have to do is now to fight for the leadership, and everyone has to be involved. All Africans have to be involved. All Africans who are able and can contribute anything, even if it's just making noise, They have to be involved in this process because we have to take the leadership from the current neo-colonial system. We have to overthrow the current neo-colonial system. If we don't overthrow it, forget about it. Then that's how we will not be able to succeed. But we can do it. If slavery was overthrown by Africans who did not even have anything, no communication, no nothing. If colonialism was overthrown by students, the Nkrumahs who were just students, the Malcolm X's, Martin Luther King when he entered and succeeded in the U.S. 1964, the signing of Civil Rights Bill, Martin Luther King was around, I think, 29 years, right? He entered and started, was very young. So these were students. The remembers, they were just students who entered the struggle 29 years.
Yeah.
So they didn't have anything. They didn't have transport. They didn't have the communication which we have today. And they defeated the system which was militarized and, all over military brutality and all that exploitation. They controlled everything. So it's just this generation has to get up. We have to get up. And we have to be serious about what is happening. And we have to point out that this is the enemy. And the African heads of state who are participating in this, they are enemies of the African people. This has to be clearly pointed out so that they themselves can know that the people know that we are enemies. And when we come all out that we are going to liberate the continent. So this has to be very clear, in our minds as Africans.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kwame, for that. So with that, we have just ended our session for today, which was assessing the forum on the China-Africa cooperation that is taking place in Beijing as we speak. Patricia Cox, everything is in our favor. Resources we have, we have knowledge. We also pose this. What needs to be done is get out of office. That I think to kick the current leaders. That's what she means.
I agree. I agree with her. I agree with her. Totally agree with her.
But somebody, Carlos says, but by the same token, in the past, Africa's strong history teaches us that we are the progenitors of history. Okay. Well, thank you, Kwame. Thank you, all of you, for engaging, for tuning in, for trusting us, for your precious time to be with us and to to give your input, your questions, your suggestions. Every little thing will will help us to grow, and you are a reason for us to come here, to dedicate to this things that we have taken upon us as a duty. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all for your donation. It doesn't matter what amount. We really thank you very much. I really want to give a shout out to Patricia and Greta Woodson. Thank you so much. But all of you, and Kwame, thank you. They said as we end this, thank you. This was educational. That's what Carlo and Bazira said. So until we meet again, which is tomorrow, we have also started to broadcast news briefly in about like 10 minutes, what's happening, things that are not like a clickbait that you don't get in other platforms, but we bring we bring everything here and we give it African perspective. So this is to say, share those videos. Now we try to come at least from Central European time, starting from the midday, like every 2 or 3 hours. So share those videos, and that will be a great support for us. Subscribe to the channel. I'm sure most of you here, you have subscribed, but if you didn't, share it with your network, give it a like. That will also help the algorithm. Kwame, as usual, thank you so much for this analysis. Ciao, ciao. Bye.